There's a photograph that does not exist of you, taken at 6 weeks old, before you had a face. If it did exist, you would not recognize what's in it. Not because the image would be blurry, because what was there genuinely does not look human yet. Somewhere between that 6-week mark and the day you were born, something in your body pulled all the separate pieces together and built the face you now think of as simply, permanently you. Let's go back to the beginning. At 4 weeks after conception, you don't have a face. You have a head, technically, a swollen bump at one end of a curled, tadpole-shaped body. The front of that bump is smooth. No eyes, no nose, no mouth, just a gap where your mouth will eventually be, wide open like a hole in unfinished clay. Here's what's actually happening underneath. Your face is not growing from a single starting point, outward. It's not like a balloon inflating. It's being assembled from 5 separate pieces, growing independently. In different locations, they have to travel toward each other and fuse in exactly the right spots. Embryologists call them facial prominences. One large piece up top, the frontonasal prominence. It becomes your forehead, the bridge of your nose, the middle of your upper lip. 2 more pieces grow in from the sides, the maxillary prominences. They become your cheeks and the outer parts of your upper lip. And 2 pieces grow up from below, the mandibular prominences, which fuse first and become your entire lower jaw and lower lip. 5 separate flaps of tissue, growing in the dark, reaching toward each other across space that, at this scale, might as well be a canyon. And here's a question worth sitting with before we go further. If your face is built this way, piece by piece, migrating and fusing along unpredictable paths, then identical twins who share the exact same DNA should end up with identical faces, same blueprint, same instructions, same result. But they don't. Anyone who has ever met a set of identical twins knows their faces are close but never truly the same. Why would 2 people with the same genetic code come out of this process looking different at all? Hold on to that. We'll come back to it. These prominences are not guided by anything you'd call intention. They're guided by cells that migrated there weeks earlier from somewhere else in the embryo entirely. In 1868, a German embryologist named Wilhelm His was studying chick embryos under a microscope. He noticed a strange band of cells breaking away from the developing neural tube, the structure that becomes your brain and spinal cord. These cells didn't stay put. They crawled. They migrated in streams, out and around, toward the front of the developing head. He called them Zwischenstrang, between strands. Today we call them neural crest cells. They are one of the strangest populations of cells in your entire body. Neural crest cells don't just sit where they land. Once they arrive at the future face, they multiply. They thicken. They physically build the prominences themselves. Nearly all of the bone, cartilage, and connective tissue in your face, your nose, your jaw, your cheekbones, came from cells that started their existence somewhere else and crawled there. Your face, structurally, is made of migrants. By week 5, the prominences are visibly growing toward each other. By week 6, the mandibular prominences have already fused into a single lower jaw. The maxillary prominences are creeping in from the sides. The frontonasal prominence above is splitting into smaller pieces of its own, developing 2 thickened patches called nasal placodes. The very first hint of a nose. This is the exact moment in that photograph that doesn't exist. 5 pieces mid-approach. A face still under construction, visible gaps between the parts like a jigsaw puzzle photographed halfway assembled. By week 7, the maxillary prominences on either side finally meet the pieces coming down from the frontonasal prominence. Where they meet matters enormously. If the fusion is even slightly incomplete, if the tissue doesn't fully merge along the seam, the result is a condition roughly 1 in every 700 babies is born with. A cleft. A cleft lip isn't a separate defect bolted onto an otherwise normal face. It's the seam itself, left open. It's proof, written directly onto a person's body, that a face is not one continuous piece of tissue. It's several pieces that were supposed to fuse and, in that case, didn't quite finish the job. Here's something almost nobody notices about their own face, even though it sits there in the mirror every single day. Run your finger from the base of your nose down to the center of your upper lip. Feel that small, vertical groove? That's called the philtrum. Doctors used to think it was just a random dip. It isn't. It's the fault line. It's the literal seam where your frontonasal prominence and your 2 maxillary prominences fuse together. 7 weeks after you were conceived. Every human being on Earth is walking around with a visible scar from their own construction. Almost nobody knows what they're looking at. Now back to the twins, because this is where it gets stranger. Neural crest cell migration is not perfectly programmed. It's guided by genetics, yes, but it's also shaped by tiny, essentially random variations. The exact number of cells that break away at any given moment, the exact speed they travel, microscopic differences in the surrounding tissue they're crawling through. Even the position of the embryo in the womb can subtly influence blood flow and pressure on one side of the developing face versus the other. Two embryos with identical DNA are still two separate physical migrations, happening in two separate bodies at two separate moments. Same instructions, different execution. It's less like a blueprint being copied twice, and more like two orchestras playing from the same sheet music in two different rooms. The notes are identical. The performance never is. That's why identical twins can be unmistakably related and still be told apart in seconds by anyone who knows them. The genetic code built the instrument. The migration performed the piece. By week 10, the process most people would call having a face is essentially finished. The prominences have merged. The nose has risen up out of the placodes. The eyes, which started out on the sides of the head, like a fish, have migrated forward and inward to their final position, giving you the depth perception that lets you judge distance. The ears, which began developing down near where your neck will be, have migrated upward to the sides of your head. Almost nothing about your face started where it ended up. So why does this process sometimes fail? For decades, that question didn't have a clean answer, but research points to a fairly consistent set of pressures. Genetics play a role. Certain gene variants make the fusion process less reliable. So does maternal smoking during the first trimester. So does folic acid deficiency, part of why doctors recommend it so aggressively before and during early pregnancy. Even timing matters. The fusion window is narrow. If the prominences arrive even slightly out of sync, slightly too early or too late, the seam may never fully close. None of this is rare in the sense of being unlikely to matter to you personally. It's rare only in the sense that it usually works. The default outcome of building a face out of 5, independently growing, independently migrating pieces of tissue should, by any reasonable expectation, fail more often than it does. It doesn't. For most of us, it closes perfectly, seamlessly, silently, weeks before anyone could have felt movement, months before anyone would ever see the result. Think about what that means. The face you have right now, the one you've looked at in mirrors for your entire life, the one strangers recognize you by, the one that changes when you smile or cry or fall asleep, is not something you were simply given fully formed. It's the outcome of a construction project that took place entirely without your awareness, using cells that traveled from somewhere else in your body, fusing along lines you can still trace with your own finger if you know where to look. You were not born with a face. You were built one. Piece by piece, seam by seam, in the dark. Or you had a heartbeat anyone could hear, before there was anyone to call you by name. And every time you touch that small groove above your upper lip without realizing it, you are touching the last visible evidence of the moment you became recognizable. The moment 5 separate pieces of you finally closed the gap. The moment a genetic blueprint became a one-of-a-kind performance and became, simply, permanently, your face.